Before we get into today's episode, I want to share with you a podcast that I think you would enjoy. When Sarah Davis lost her father in 2020, her grief was so raw and overwhelming. It was like standing in the face of an oncoming storm and trying to breathe wind. She created the podcast Breathing Wind as a way to process this grief with others who had also lost a parent. Before long, Sarah realized that Breathing Wind was becoming a community that created a space to talk about loss in a way that isn't done enough in our society. Each season of Breathing Wind follows Sarah's own grief process, with season 1 featuring stories from people who were the first of their peers to lose parents, followed by season 2, where Sarah and 3 guest hosts explore different modes of healing. Currently in its 3rd season, Breathing Wind is investigating the intersection of joy and grief, with guest hosts sharing the joy they find in so many different ways, from being in the wilderness, expressing and enjoying humor, recognizing their own resilience, and fully exploring the senses. This show has meant a lot to me over the past year. If you're experiencing grief over the loss of a loved one, especially a parent, and are looking for ways to work with it, Sarah Davis's podcast, Breathing Wind, is a great place to start. At the end of this show, I'll include a trailer to Breathing Wind. You can find Breathing Wind anywhere you listen to podcasts and at breathingwind.com. Do you want to change the world? So do I. On this show, we meet artists whose work is doing just that. Welcome to Art Heals All Wounds. I'm your host, Pam Uzel. Do you think of your life as a journey? Then imagine wanting to go somewhere. No, needing to go somewhere, but you didn't know how to get there. If you were to check all the apps, Google Maps, Apple Maps, nothing. Your destination isn't even listed. This kind of journey takes courage. My guest on today's episode started her career as an independent filmmaker with no directions, no idea really how to do it. Growing up in India, she didn't see many films, so becoming a filmmaker wasn't something she had dreamed of. But after moving to California, she tried a film class at a local community college, and that was it. She was bitten by the bug. She didn't know how she was going to make it as a filmmaker, but she did know it was the path for her. Hers has been an amazing journey, sharing stories in motion picture, both hers and others. Each film finished is reassurance that she is going the right way, with the best still ahead of her. Alka Raghuram is an independent filmmaker who makes narrative, documentary, and experimental films, as well as multimedia projects. Growing up in Indore, India, Alka saw films rarely. She did, however, love stories and read voraciously, and also painted and drew. In the 1990s, she and her husband moved to the Bay Area in California. It was there that Alka took a filmmaking class at a local community college and realized that she had finally found a medium that combined everything she wanted to do as a storyteller. Alka has completed 7 films and multimedia projects, and will speak about one of them in particular, her award-winning documentary, Burqa Boxers, the story of Muslim women boxers in Kolkata. She also has 3 upcoming projects: Besides having strong visual skills, her sensitivity to her subjects and her respect for their stories is apparent in all of her work. I first met Alka in the San Francisco State University Cinema MFA program. In our conversation, we speak about a teacher in that program, Bill Nichols, who was very influential for Alka and myself as well, in challenging us to consider the ethics around telling stories, particularly stories that aren't our own. I'm excited to share Alka's thoughts about how she finds her way in these stories as either insider or outsider. Hi, Alka. Thank you so much for being on this episode of Art Heals All Wounds. Can you start by telling us who you are and what you do?
Hi, Pam. Thank you for inviting me on your podcast, Art Heals All Wounds. My name is Alka Raghuram. I am a filmmaker and a multidisciplinary artist. I paint, I sculpt, and I primarily make films.
Yes. And we met a long time ago at this point in film. Well, shortly out, while we were still in film school. And reconnected from time to time over the years. And you're doing so much interesting work right now that I really wanted to take this moment to ask you a little bit about, your background, where you grew up, when you started doing film. So maybe start with, where did you grow up? Did you know from an early age that you wanted to do film?
I grew up in India in a small town. It was a small town when I was growing up. Now it's more like a second tier city in India. It's called Indore. And no, I didn't know even remotely that I would make films, but I was a voracious consumer of stories growing up. We didn't have TV when I was growing up, but so there was not so much audio-visual stories, but books were something that was from the time I can remember. It has been always been my companion. So I was just kind of lived in my own world of stories and reading them, making them up, and that was my favorite pastime. It was not even on the radar that me growing up there would consider making films. They seemed so beyond my reach that would not even occur to me that I would do that. And when I came to the US, my husband and I got married in India, and then we came here, and then I didn't have a visa to work here. So I was thinking of going back to school. And that's where I was looking at, all places to go back to school and if I needed prerequisites and what did I need to do. So there were two options for me. One was children's books illustration. And then I came upon at a community college this course in filmmaking, and it just kind of blew my mind that there could be something like that could exist. So, there could be something like that. And I feel like it brought together everything that had always been my interest. I've always, painted or illustrated, and I have, read a lot, I have written. And I felt like this would be an amalgamation of all those interests for me. So that's why I signed up, and I was lucky. I had Jay Rosenblatt, who was a very, very well-known filmmaker, experimental filmmaker. He was my first teacher. And I mean, consider this, starting with someone so accomplished, your first film or first foray into filmmaking. So that was a very inspiring class for me. And from then on, I think it was pretty clear that I would want to pursue it full-time, as much full-time as I could gather with kids. I didn't have any background in film, so I needed to watch a lot of films, read about them, see how to think about them. I needed to understand film history. I needed to have a handle on how to think about telling stories in that medium. And I wanted to do my master's, study further in it, but before that I needed to have certain prerequisites as well as just creating a base for myself, base of knowledge. So I took classes more classes at College of San Mateo and also De Anza College. And then I applied to SF State, where I got in, and it gave me 2 years to focus on refining my skills and understanding and being with people who also, were passionate storytellers, experimental and documentary, and few fiction. That was not that much of a fiction school, more experimental and documentary.
I was reading an article about you, and you said something really important, that taking a class with Bill Nichols, who was a professor in the MFA of Cinema program at San Francisco State, was really important to your development as a filmmaker. Can you talk about that? Why was that important?
Yeah, I was coming so fresh into filmmaking. I didn't know what the power dynamic of the storyteller, what the gaze meant, what it meant to be telling a story about something else or someone else, who holds power in that, and to have Bill discuss these ideas in class and illustrate that with examples from other films and what it meant to own your story, to tell your story from your own perspective, and what is the difference between someone else telling your story and you telling your own story, the insider and outsider view, and not judging the gaze of the insider or the outsider, but being aware of it so you can inhabit both places with understanding and mindfulness. So an outsider is an outside, and that gaze is as important as the gaze of the insider, or your own story and your perspective is as important as someone else telling your story from their perspective. This information or this understanding of where the power dynamic lies was really something that guided me when I went to film my documentary Burqa Boxers about Muslim women boxers in Kolkata, India. And, in broad strokes, I'm Indian and this is a story from India. And so it's my story. It's an insider's point of view. But really, it's not, because I don't come from that socioeconomic background. I have a whole lot of class privilege as soon as I walk into that neighborhood. And also, I'm not a Muslim. I'm not from that religious background either. So in a way, it's not my story, and I have to be very careful in telling this story with sensitivity and kind of allowing the subjects as much power in telling their story as, as I have, at least, starting on an equal footing. So I think if I had not known that, I would have not been even aware of my privilege. So I wouldn't have had the background to understand that that exists. So it allowed me to kind of create a protocol, for myself, that I would have people decide how they wanted to present themselves. And I would not want to go investigating whatever persona they wanted to present. I would not want to kind of investigate underneath it, because it's not the power situation where I could investigate that. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. I do understand that. So tell me a little bit about Burqa Boxers, because I think this is a really important film for you. What were sort of the outcomes of getting this film, this story told for you as a filmmaker?
That's interesting that you ask the outcomes, because as filmmakers and artists, we make films, we tell stories, we create art, and then we kind of have to figure out, was it successful or not? And to me, one way to kind of make sense of its success is to say, did it allow me to take the next step? Did it serve as a stepping stone to my next journey?
Right.
And that kind of, to me, in my head, that keeps me from judging it from the outsider's perspective as, did it win so many awards? Did it do this? Did it do that? It kind of keeps me out of that kind of comparing myself to others, but also it gives me a very clear idea of how to think about my career, to think about my journey as an artist and a storyteller. So Burqa Boxers, from the perspective of getting a very ambitious story, which was set in this place, and then to raise money for it. It was challenging because they came from very traditional backgrounds. Like at various levels, it was a challenge to tell the story. And so just that I was able to finish that, it to me gave me confidence that I can tell an ambitious story. Number one, that has a wide kind of canvas. So I can raise money for it. I can create collaborations, international collaborations, and I can work with various stakeholders to make it happen. And I did make it happen. So that it was in itself my story in parallel to theirs. Like if they won a championship, this would be an equivalent to that, So, or they trained well enough to reach a championship level, this would be an equivalent to that,
Right.
So I think just in that sense, it was, to me, the outcome was amazing and fulfilling and satisfying. I was also writing a fiction story when I started filming the documentary. And this is something that I'm noticing about myself, that whatever idea comes to me, I feel like I need to explore it by telling different stories about it. So Burqa Boxers is a documentary. It was rooted in that community. And when I was writing a fiction story, when I went there, I felt the women wanted to present themselves in a certain way, but there was a lot of conflict in putting on this brave face and taking this radical step. But the price they pay for it, the psychological price they pay for it, it was very, very, in terms of this constant fear of ridicule from the community or judgment from the community, which is huge because they are also conditioned to marry within the community. Not conditioned, they want to their community. It's not a bad conditioning, but it's just something that we all want to belong to our community. And taking this step puts them on the periphery of acceptability. So I felt like that psychological price was something that they didn't speak about that much because they wanted to put on this brave face. And I felt like that would be in the realm of fiction. The distance between home and ring is not just the road that they travel, the kilometers or the miles, but it's also the different psychologies that they inhabit in the two places and what they do to overcome one and come to the other. That's a wide gap. And I wanted to explore that. I thought fiction would be a good way to explore it. So I wrote a script called In the Ring, which is also set in the same milieu, but it's a psychological thriller.
Oh, wow. That sounds so interesting. So you said something to me the other day that you feel like you always tell the same stories, just in different settings. Can you talk about that? What story are you telling over and over?
On the one hand, I don't want to know what story I'm telling because I'm afraid that it'll dry up. I won't be able to tell that story but I think there are certain patterns that are in all stories of people being lost, that is there in The Ant and the Monkey, which is a short fiction about two kids, and they're both lost in their own homes. They are lost. They don't know if they're loved, and they both try to find their way, through that lostness. So I feel like, and in Burqa Boxers, I feel the women want to be successful in the world, and they don't know how to get to that place, and they're trying different things and taking steps, and sometimes it succeeds, but it may not succeed to the level that the world needs them. They are lost in the sense they don't know how to navigate that world of finding their foot in it. And I find I am telling that story in some way or another, and no matter what the topic, somehow I kind of map that onto the topic and intuitively and tell that, the story becomes that.
That is so interesting because, of course, I'm going to ask you, well, what does being lost mean to you? Why do you think you're mapping that story?
I think being able to navigate the world with assurance, with confidence, is something that I feel I am gaining. It's a work in progress for me. I'm gaining as I tell my stories. And it's not something that was given to me on a platter. That
Right.
here's the world, this is the way you do it, and you go and you win it, you know. And I'm sure it's universal to people. I'm sure people like quake and are scared inside, everyone. But I feel in particular, growing up in a small town in India, like you couldn't go out in the evening because it's not safe. You don't do things because they're not safe. So the world outside is always an unsafe place. So even though you find your footing, it's always with a lot of fear, and like every step takes enormous amount of stamina to kind of take it. And this is in hindsight, I'm kind of analyzing myself, but navigating the world is a difficult thing for me, and I'm assuming for everyone.
That's really interesting. Well, I don't know if you want to talk about your other project, the Krishna project that's in pre-production, or if you could even just say a little bit about it, because this, when I first read about it, I thought, oh, this seems like a departure, but really talking to you, it doesn't. So what is this project that you're going to do about Krishna?
Yeah, so it came about, the seed of it was sown when I was working, and I'm continuing to work on this multimedia project with the Chitresh Das Institute. It's a dance project, and I'm creating multimedia for them. And we've worked together in the past as well. And this was the artistic director, Charlotte, wanted to create a dance drama, which would called Invoking the River, about the mythological significance of rivers. And a lot of Indian classical dance is based on mythological stories, like all classical dances. And rivers play a huge part in those myths. And then looking at the river, which is considered a goddess and mother and the nourisher, and then it's environmental degradation. And, like, how do we worship and how do we kind of destroy the same entity, and the discrepancy between our idea of the same entity we are worshipping and its reality, what we are doing. And Krishna is a mythological kind of god who's a reincarnation of the Holy Trinity in Hindus, called Vishnu, who reincarnates himself periodically on earth to guide humans into a more holistic way of living, and or whatever the pertinent issues are at that point, to kind of guide them towards navigating those issues. There are a lot of stories about Krishna by the river, and I felt like Krishna as a superhero would be a woman superhero named Krishna would be awesome. And then also, what qualities would I want in a superhero? So Krishna is a sci-fi series about Krishna, who's a young woman who has this ability to listen, to understand. She's a field biologist, and she understands sounds, and she understands sounds that other creatures make, and she understands how to read water, how to read air, how to read signs in nature. That's native wisdom in all societies also. And her adventures in sailing the river. That's the sci-fi Krishna story.
I love that. I love that. I love sci-fi, but I prefer sci-fi and fantasy by women.
Me too.
Yes, there's always such a particular take on it that is just so wise and kind of so nourishing for wherever we are right now. So
yes,
I am very excited about that. So Alka, if people want to learn more about you and learn about your work and follow some of these projects as they develop, where can they find you?
so Junoon Pictures pictures.com. Junoon as in Junoon, pictures.com. Junoon is an Urdu word that means obsession.
I love that. Yes. And also, I'll just add that if they Google you,
Yes.
there have been some really wonderful interviews that they can either read or watch. So that's another great way to find out more about you. Thank you so much for being on the show and talking about some of your work. It's really great to get this fuller picture of what you've done and where you're going.
Thank you.
You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. I loved this conversation with Alka. Her work shows how ethics and sensitivity can invite the viewer in for a new experience without compromising the integrity of the subject living that story. I hope that you'll look her up on her website, junoonpictures.com, and Google her for some wonderful articles about her and her films. Thank you for listening to this episode of Art Heals All Wounds. I appreciate every listener of this podcast. If you'd like to help us out, please follow us on your favorite podcasting app and share this show with a friend. The music you've heard in this podcast is by Ketsa and Lobo Loco. This podcast was edited by Eva Hristova. Art Heals All Wounds comes to you from Oakland, California, on unceded territory of the Choqueño Ohlone people.
I'm Sarah Davis, founder and producer of Breathing Wind, a podcast about grief, parent loss, change, and healing. This season, I'm joined by 4 amazingly talented guest hosts. We are discussing joy in its many forms from different angles, with the recognition that joy is a complex emotion. So, what is joy? Joy takes into account the full spectrum of feelings. Joy is the both and. In other words, joy can be felt at any time for any reason with other emotions like grief.
Joy is who we are when our hearts are at their wildest. It's the integration between our doing and our being. And it's when I feel most alive and fulfilled. And I get to experience that when I'm in the wilderness. And I get to witness that when I see others in the wilderness.
I find joy through a deep sense of connection, through an experience with someone or something generated by love, gratitude, awe, and oftentimes for me, humor.
Joy is my inherent nature. I really do feel it to be the essence of who I am and how I move through the world, which is interesting because so much of the work I do is around grief and loss and dying. And yet those experiences and journeys are so much more expansive than we might believe them to be and are capable of holding joy too and many other positive emotions that we might not associate with them.
You can listen to us at breathingwind.com or wherever you get your podcasts.